Hey, what is going on, everyone? Let's talk about the bad major cities in the U.S. I get asked all the time, what are the best, what are the worst major cities in the U.S.? Everyone always hears about Chicago and Detroit and just all those, but there's a lot of major cities in this country. A major city is a city with over 100,000 population. So that's 100,000 people or up. So please, don't leave a comment about how your town of Moose Knuckle, Arkansas, with its population of 1,300, has a major gang problem. We're not too concerned about your 5 gangsters. Now, I did a couple videos back in 2016, and I figured maybe it was time to update those lists and see where we stand now. A couple of things to keep in mind. Crime isn't the only way to measure a city. You have costs of living, overpopulation, housing costs, education, etc., etc. Most organizations that measure these type things call it livability. So we're going by livability, and let's see what they are. Here's my top 10 worst major cities in the U.S. Number 10, Springfield, Missouri. The population in Springfield is 167,000 people. The median home value is about 110,000. Now this is startling. They have a poverty rate of 25.1%. A quarter of their people live in poverty. Now, I said crime isn't the only way a city makes a list like this. Well, there are a few other cities in this country that have a greater crime problem than Springfield, Missouri. You have a good chance of being the victim of a crime here. They get about 1,400 incidents per 100,000 residents. That is more than 3 times the national average. Their property crime is really, really bad too. And they lead the country in people assaulted while wearing a clown costume. And that's not funny. Okay, maybe it's a little funny, but still, it shouldn't happen. It's wrong. Don't beat up clowns. Here's a fun fact. The average school test scores in Springfield are 7% lower than the national average. So crime and horrible schools. Number 9, Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford has a population of 123,000 people. The median home price is about 161,000, and they've got a poverty rate of 27.3%. A lot of poor people floating around Hartford, Connecticut. That's too bad. That's a shame. Hartford is the worst major city to live in New England. The city's poor economic conditions are driving people out of Hartford. In the last 5 years, Hartford's population shrank by 1.3%. I mean, besides the economic issues, back in 1997, they lost their hockey team. The Hartford Whalers moved to Carolina and became the Hurricanes. That's a shame. Anyway, last March, the unemployment rate hit about 8%. That was last time it was actually posted. And that's too bad. I'd like to see what it is now. It was trending downwards, but last we know it was 8%. Here's a fun fact. The unemployment rate in Hartford is 131% higher than the national average. Man. Number 8, Stockton, California. Stockton, California has a population of about 305,000 people. The median home value is about $224,000. They have a poverty level of 25.8%. Man, that sucks. Stockton is notoriously bad. It has become one of those places that you don't stop for gas or pee anymore as you work your way up Interstate 5. Nobody really moves to Stockton unless you're like being released from prison. That's how you end up at Stockton these days. They have a solid amount of crime going on, and in Stockton you have a 1 in 20 chance of becoming a victim of any crime. I had one subscriber tell me that he works in Brentwood, which is towards San Francisco. It's about 30 to 45 minutes away, theoretically. By the way, for those of you that are about to tell me that Brentwood is in Southern California, there's one in Northern California too. Look it up. Anyway, he said his trip used to be about 30, 45 minutes in the morning, but so many people now are leaving Stockton every morning because there's no more jobs that they have to go out, that his ride in the morning is becoming an hour and a half some days. It's pretty bad. Here's a fun fact. The poverty level in Stockton is 57% higher than the national average. Number 7, Baltimore, Maryland. The population in Baltimore, Maryland is 622,000 people. The median home value is about $155,000. Their poverty rate isn't as bad as some of the others on this list. It's only 22.9%. Don't worry, they make it up in crime. And really, what can you say about Baltimore that you already don't know from an episode of America's Most Wanted? Well, did you know Baltimore is only 50 minutes away from Washington, D.C.? That's how long it is in theory because Baltimore and D.C. have horrific traffic. It can take up to 3 hours some days. Baltimore is dangerous. You have a 1 in 16 chance of becoming the victim of any crime. Here's a fun fact. The average school test score in Baltimore is 59% lower than the national average. Hey, but at least they got the Ravens, right? Number 6, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee's population is about 600,000 people with a median home value of about $114,000. Their poverty rate is 27%. That low housing and that high a poverty rate, you know nothing good's going on in Milwaukee. Milwaukee, Wisconsin is the only bad place, really, in a relatively quiet state. This city wasn't anywhere near a top 10 list like this, say, 10 years ago. What a difference a decade makes, right? Don't get me wrong, it's never been some golden city on Lake Michigan. But it was never the worst. Milwaukee's population is shrinking. In the last 5 years, the city's population has dropped 1%. Like I said before, 1% when you're talking about population stats of a major city is a big number. Now this is going on even as the U.S. population grew by 3.7%. Everyone else is growing, just a lot of these cities are losing people. Here's a fun fact. The average school test score in Milwaukee is 57% lower than the national average. Number 5. Memphis, Tennessee. The population in Memphis is about 655,000 people. The median home value is about $94,000. What the? $94,000. Anyway, their poverty rate is 27%, just like Milwaukee. This place is not doing good. Memphis is in some serious financial trouble. They got a high crime rate, and their overall quality of life for many residents just sucks. Memphis was on my last worst cities in the United States list, and I feel like they should get some kind of award for being consistently bad. Not sure if the mayor would show up to collect that award. His loss, right? I mean, if someone offered me a reason to leave Memphis for a while, I would. I mean, come on. In Memphis, you have a 1 in 14 chance of being the victim of a crime. Here's a fun fact. The poverty level in Memphis is 83% higher than the national average. Now, in case you don't know anything about statistics and crime stats and stuff like that, here's one true thing. If you've got a high poverty level, you're going to have a high crime level. They just go hand in hand. I mean, common sense tells everyone that. Some people don't get it. They're always together. Number 4. St. Louis, Missouri. The population in St. Louis is 315,000 people. The median home value is about $125,000. Their poverty level is at about 26.9%. St. Louis is the worst city to live in Missouri and the 4th worst nationwide. A concentration of violence in parts of the city makes St. Louis a particularly difficult place to live. St. Louis doesn't have a lot going for them. I get the feeling the state has kind of given up on them. And it's too bad. They have some great people and some great history. In my lifetime, they've even lost 2 football teams, the Cardinals and the Rams. And before you say anything, please Google Arizona Cardinals. Last time I made a video and said that the NFL Cardinals left St. Louis, I had a few mouth breathers call me on it and say I was an idiot and that the Cardinals have always been in Arizona. People, think before you type. It's like a public service announcement. I've also had people call me an idiot because I said the Kings play at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, and the guy said, "Oh, what an idiot. They play in Sacramento." Okay, so I had to inform that dude that there's this sport called hockey, and there's a league called the NHL, and there's a team called the Los Angeles Kings. They were there before the Sacramento Kings. People, I don't know. Anyway, back to St. Louis. Crime rates are often higher in economically depressed areas. St. Louis is a relatively poor city. Like I said, 27% of the residents live below the poverty line, and that's not good for any city. Here's a fun fact. In St. Louis, you have a 1 in 12 chance to become the victim of any crime. Number 3, Cleveland, Ohio. The population in Cleveland, Ohio is 385,000 people. Now get this, the median home value is $66,000. They also have a poverty rate of 35%. Now, here's the thing. $66,000. That's like the only place in the country where you could actually buy a home on a fast food paycheck. You know, you could actually get a 30-year loan and make payments on $66,000 working at McDonald's as just the fry guy. You don't even have to be the manager. That's amazing. Now, this one is sad. Nothing good ever seems to happen to Cleveland. They had the river catch fire in the 1960s, not the docks or the boats. The actual water was so polluted, it caught fire. The Cuyahoga River, look it up, it's amazing. They also made a series of movies about how bad the Cleveland Indians baseball team sucked. That was great, Major League, look it up. The Browns, their football team, they've always sucked. Okay, well, to be fair, they did have a handful of good years back in the 80s, and that's about it. In the 80s, it's 2018. This year, they lost LeBron again, and they have a sports stadium that's commonly referred to as a factory of sadness. No wonder this place is depressed. Cleveland's just an unlucky city. They have widespread poverty, a high crime rate, and a bleak jobs picture partially explains the decline in population. In the last decade, Cleveland's population fell by 2.4%. Even while the country's population has been growing, this place fell by 2.4%. That's insane. And here's a fun fact. The overall crime rate in Cleveland is 145% higher than the national average. Now, I'm not sure if they're counting in the disappearance of over 20 quarterbacks, but it's pretty high. Number 2, San Bernardino, California. The population in San Bernardino is 216,000 people. Median home value is $240,000, and they have a poverty rate of just under 30%. Now, I grew up knowing about San Bernardino. In where I come from, we call it San Bernardino. And there's some people out there that will correct me on it, but I'm just going to call it what I've always called it. Just so you know what I'm talking about, it's actually called San Bernardino, but I can't keep that up this whole video. Anyway, their poverty rate is actually 29.6%. That's the third highest in the state and more than doubles the U.S. poverty rate. Widespread poverty is due to the lack of available jobs in the city. They have a serious crime issue which is forcing businesses to flee the city, compounding the problems. Growing up in Southern California, you just knew there was no real reason to go out here. This is the type of place if your car breaks down in San Bernardino, you just leave it. Get a new car, something. Back then, most of us drove really crappy cars, so that was easy to do, but still. Drive down any major street here and you will be depressed. It used to be a really, really nice city back in, let's say, the 60s and maybe a good portion of the 70s, but it just kept getting worse after that. And it was hammered in the 2008 collapse, and they've been struggling to recover for a very long time. I watched a pretty good documentary about it on Los Angeles Times has a YouTube channel, and it was pretty interesting. It was really sad. I'll leave a link for that below. You should check that one out. Here's a fun fact about San Bernardino. The unemployment rate is 71% higher than the national average. It's too bad. If you look at the architecture of this city, it's nice. It's just trashy right now. And number 1, Detroit, Michigan. Detroit, Michigan has a population of 677,000 people. The median home value is $42,000. You could actually get a house if you paid the back taxes, I've heard. I read an article about that. I don't know if they're still doing that, but that's pretty weird. They have a poverty rate of almost 40%, 39.8% to be exact. That was in 2017. This is the poster child for America's post-industrial urban collapse. Detroit, Michigan is always listed as the worst city in the country. Now, right here, most people are always shocked that Chicago wasn't number 1 about this point of the list. Chicago does have a high murder rate, but compared to the rest of the cities that are on lists like this, they're not even in the top 20. They have a lot of murders, but they also have 3 million people compared to like the next closest, which has 600,000 people. It just doesn't add up. That's the news sensationalizing what's going on in Chicago. Detroit has other problems. Violence isn't as much one of them. Well, it kind of is, but not as bad as some other places. Anyway, I'm babbling. Detroit was once home of 1.8 million residents at its peak. The U.S. auto manufacturing in the 1950s was the glory days of Detroit. The city is now home to fewer than 700,000 people after decades of decline. 1 in 3 residents live below the poverty line. Along with Las Vegas, it is one of the only 2 cities nationwide that were over 2,000 violent crimes for every 100,000 people in 2017. Detroit was once one of our greatest cities. Detroit has great people that care about this city, more than I ever would have imagined. I made a video about Detroit, and those people didn't like it at all. I just stated facts. I just stated numbers and facts, and of course I have my, little snarky remarks I put in there. But it is easy to live in a city that's doing good and be proud of it. But it takes character and passion to stand up in defense of a city that's been hammered like Detroit for a couple decades now. Detroit, sadly, is, again, the number 1 on this list. Alright, so that's the top 10 worst major cities in the United States. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Don't forget all those things you get to hit, buttons, likes, leave a comment. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.